Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's episode of Advanced Bass Fishing, and much appreciated you guys joining me in the tackle room here for today's episode, because we're going to be talking about how to find and how to eliminate dead water in a lake. Now, what I'm talking about here is you've heard there's an old adage in fishing that the bass live in 10% of the lake and 90% of the lake does not have any fish in it. There's a lot of truth to that. So today I'm going to give you guys some good foundational advice on how to quickly identify dead water where there's just not much potential on it, because sometimes it's not quite as simple as it sounds. So we're going to dig into that in today's episode. I think it'll help you guys out quite a bit. Also, guys, just want to give you guys a quick invitation here. If you guys are looking to get stocked up on your spring tackle, just invite you to please check out and use and bookmark my tackle warehouse link I put in the description. If you guys like advanced bass fishing and you want to give something back to the channel for getting the information from the videos, just purchasing your tackle by using that link is a good way to do it. The channel gets a small percentage of a commission on anything you buy. So big thank you from me and my family for everybody that's been doing that. Okay, one of the sort of like the non-glamorous parts about fishing that people don't get too excited about is finding water or finding where the fish live at or understanding seasonal movements and patterns of bass. Sort of boring. Most people want to know about lure colors and different lures and the latest, quick fix to catch a fish. But one of the things that you're going to have to do if you're serious about bass fishing and you're serious about catching fish over the long term is you have to learn how to quickly identify and eliminate unproductive or dead water in a lake. Because if you fish a large lake or any lake over about 500 acres, you're going to have to know this. If not, you're going to spend a lot of time, fishing where there's no fish at, especially if you're more of a traditional angler that does not use live scope. Now, if you're fishing a smaller lake, like ponds and smaller bodies of water, you can pretty much cover everything in a day's fishing, so that's not that big of a deal. This is more geared for larger man-made impoundments or natural lakes that have a lot of surface acres on them. Okay, first of all, one of the things that you have to do before you can eliminate a part of a lake or decide what the dead water is, a lot of it has to do with the water visibility. Now, in general, the dirtier the water a lake has, the more dead water it's going to have. And the clearer the water is in a lake, the less dead water. It just seems like to me, from my experience, clear water lakes tend to have a lot more bass that use about any type of cover or any type of bank on that lake to some extent. But if you have dirty water, not so much, because there's got to be certain things within that dirty water that are appealing to the fish in terms of, how the cover's laid out and, the depth of the cover and that type of situation. Because in dirty water, you don't have bass that suspend as much. So therefore the bass are going to use more, they're going to be more bank oriented, and they're going to be a little bit more picky about the banks they get on because it has to be prime type habitat. Okay, so the first thing that you can do to really eliminate or right off the bat find a lot of areas that could possibly be dead is look at your map of the lake, Navionics or whatever that you have there, and try to look in the areas that don't have much access to deep water or any type of a creek channel close by. In general, if you have areas that are a long way away from any type of deeper water or creek or river channel, those areas are normally not going to be quite as productive. The only exception to this would be like in the summertime of the year, if you have a real flat area that's not very close to deep water that has a lot of shallow cover on it, sometimes that can pull those fish up in there. But most of the time, that is going to be a big indicator that there's not going to be a lot of fish there, is not having some type of a relative deep water access. Now, I don't mean like a super close access, but I'm talking about something like within 50 to 100 yards of it, where there's an old creek or river or something like that. That's a big part of it. The next thing that you can look at is the cover on the bank, the type of cover. In general, you need some type of habitat for the fish. Now, that habitat can be a wide range of things. It can be rock, it can be larger rock, which provides good habitat. It can be, wood cover like laydowns and trees. It can be docks, it could be shallow grass, anything that gives bass an ambush point to get onto. But if you have those banks out there that are like flat and, gravelly or clay, and they don't have much deep water, they don't have much cover, that's probably going to be, a fairly dead area, especially if it's on the main lake. Now, there's another thing about that is there tends to be more dead water on a main lake than there are like in the coves and creeks of a lake. In general, most man-made lakes have quite a few tributary creeks running into them, and those tributary creeks usually have a lot more life in them, and they have a lot less dead water because there's more going on there. There's usually some type of a current flow. There's fluctuations in the water clarity that you have in there based upon the rains. They're not as big, and bass tend to use more of a diversity of areas within a creek than they do on the main lake. Main lake is notorious for having a lot of dead water on it. Now, the dead water that is on the main lake, again, tends to be those areas that are flatter, farther away from deep water, not much cover on it. Another thing that you can do to really, get away from that dead water, it depends on the time of the year that you're fishing in relative terms to the part of the lake you're fishing. Now, here is a good rule of thumb to follow as far as water temperatures and seasons based upon the part of the lake you're fishing. If you're fishing in the winter time of the year, most of the time, the best water is going to be on the lower end of the lake where the water's cleaner down there. It's just a better environment for the fish. So therefore, the dead water in the wintertime is going to be those upper tributaries, the upper part of the rivers, the areas that have a lot more of a stain to the water. Cold water and stained water do not mix. So, if you're fishing between, say, December and March in that zone, try to stay on the lower end of the lake because the upper end of the lake, the back of the creeks, a lot of those time of the year, that's going to be dead water. As the water warms up a little bit, there's a little bit of a shift in that. Now, as it warms up, like in the springtime of the year, bass are wanting to move shallower in the springtime of the year. So the best areas in the springtime of the year are going to be those flatter, protected areas that give bass some type of cover and some type of a productive area to spawn in. Those areas usually, again, are productive. They're flatter. They're back in coves. They tend to be protected from the wind. They tend to be south-facing to get more sun. Those are real good areas. So in the springtime of the year, stay away from those areas that tend to be steeper and on the main lake. Bluff banks, steep rocky banks, all that type of a situation is not going to be that productive. It's going to be pretty dead in the springtime of the year overall. And especially if you go up the river, it's going to change a little bit because as that water warms up, if you start going back into the river arms and the creek arms, it's a little bit different because those fish up in the river and the creek arms, they will get on the steeper banks during the spring, like the rocky banks up there, but they don't do that down the lake. So a lot of it just depends on the part of the lake that you're in. But in general, for the most part, unless you're fishing the upper tributaries of a lake during the springtime of the year, there's going to be a lot of dead water on those steep banks, and there's going to be a lot of dead water on the main lake steep banks. Now, as the summer gets along, a lot of your dead water, again, it's going to change. In the summertime of the year, there's a lot of stuff going on. You have, some fish suspended. You have some fish a little deeper that are above the thermocline. You have a lot of fish that are shallow that are feeding on bluegill that are spawning and, using shallow cover. So for the most part, in the summertime of the year, you don't have quite as much dead water because the bass are using a diversity of depths out there. The only difference between that, again, is if I could give you one piece of advice to avoid dead water in the summertime, that would be stay away from the steeper main lake banks. Those steeper main lake banks in the summertime of the year are normally not that productive. I like to stay on the flatter banks that have shallow cover on it, or like on points, like secondary and main lake points where you can have fish moving up and down on it. But, I don't fish very much steep rocky stuff in the summertime of the year. In the fall time of the year, this is one time of year where there's probably the least amount of dead water than anything. Because one thing you'll find about it in the fall time is that the bass are really, really, they feed accordingly to the weather patterns, the wind and the sunlight conditions in a big way. The number one thing for me as far as finding productive water in the fall time of the year is to fish windy banks. You can catch bass on windy banks pretty much all over a lake, except if the lake is really dirty, like we talked about. But that is one time of the year where bass start to disperse throughout the lake. And you've got bass super shallow, you got bass suspended, you got bass mid-depth, you got bass on the bottom that are deep. They're literally all over the place. So there's not near as much dead water in the fall time of the year than the rest of the time. But the main thing, guys, is like it's to me, it's a combination of cover and the water clarity. And once you get a feel for it, you can pretty much, look at an area and pretty much assess its potential a lot of times. The deadest water on the lake is usually going to be the areas that have the least amount of cover on it. Again, with the exception if the water is really clear, that can be a little bit, that can throw a tweak in there a little bit. But just try to stay on areas that have sort of a diversity of cover. Now, that diversity of cover can be rock, it can be rock transitions, it can be mixed rock, it can be, just something a little bit different. And try to put yourself in the position if you were a bass. It's like if you were a bass and you realize that you have to have an ambush placed in order to hunt and to find food, and the area that you're hunting in, whether it be around some boat docks or rocks, you're looking for crawdads, you're looking for minnows, you're looking for perch. Just try to figure out or try to think a little bit about where those fish are going to be, and concentrate on those areas. Another good way to eliminate a lot of dead water is stay away from those areas that don't catch a lot of shade. Shade is a big factor in fishing most all year long, with the exception of the winter time. A lot of times bass will use shade as cover, just like they would a log or something. So try to stay away from those areas that don't have much shade, that don't have much cover, that don't have much deep water access by, and that's gonna put you around a lot more fish. But main thing, guys, is if you're gonna in order to consistently put yourself around bass a lot, you have to have an understanding of those seasonal movements and patterns of the fish, and that's something that takes time. There's a lot of information accessible for you guys. If you guys want to go to my intuitive angling channel and check out the seasonal patterns and bass condition playlist I got, that gives you a lot of good information with it. But there's some things you can do to give yourself a higher odds of catching fish. But one thing I'll leave you with, aside from everything I just said, take it with a grain of salt a little bit, because what the number one rule in bass fishing is? The bass are where you find them at. They're where they're at. And a lot of times there's no rhyme or reason. A lot of times there's no rational, logical explanation why bass are on a certain area. Sometimes they just are. Sometimes there's things going on under the water that we can't see that track those fish there. Sometimes they go to certain areas, that get a lot of, that don't have as much recreational or fishing pressure on them. There's a lot of factors to that. So just another reason why bass fishing's so tough, man. It's the toughest sport in the world because there's just so many dang variables to it. But hopefully that'll help you guys out a little bit, and we'll talk later.